Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Preston Smith, and I'm the dean here at the College of Medicine. And I want to welcome you and thank you. Thank you for coming for this memorial for our friend and colleague, Pat Brophy. Obviously a sad occasion, but Pat wouldn't be happy if it wasn't an inspiring occasion as well. And I think for me, I first want to extend my condolences to Jody and Joe and Mike and all of the family, close and distant relatives that may be here and not here. I'd like to extend my personal condolences as well, and that of Jane, obviously to the family, but to the Department of Pediatrics here in Saskatchewan. But I know Pat touched pediatricians and pediatricians in training all around North America. I want to extend condolences to the class of '94. I know that he was dearly loved classmate and a good friend to many. I've done a lot of recruitments, as those people here know, in the last 10 years, but this was one of the most fun, exciting, and potential-filled recruitment that I think I ever did. Apologies to the department heads in the room that are thinking, what about me? It was just amazing to talk to Pat and hear his vision for child health and wellness for the whole province of Saskatchewan, and just his ability to articulate an incredibly powerful vision of what leadership in healthcare and medical education and research should be. I was also lucky, and you're going to hear from one of my colleagues in the golf group, so I was also lucky enough to socialize a fair bit in a short time with Pat. But I remember the day that he came here to be interviewed and meet stakeholders, and I spent quite a bit of time with him at that day. And it was just, as I said, amazing to listen to his vision for medical education and research and child health care. But he was articulate, he was professional, he was deadly serious virtually all of that day, as you should be when you're competing for, or auditioning for a job. And then I went to dinner that night, and I looked and I thought, he looks like the guy that I was with all day. But it was this other Pat that we all know and love that was so funny and so engaging and with such an amazing people skills. He just was, I can't think about how many people have told me how he was the full meal deal in a leader and in a person and in a doctor and an educator. And I just really extend my personal condolences and that of my wife Jane, again Jody, Joe, and Mike, and all of the family, all the classmates, and all the friends. We have a few speakers, and I'm going to now ask my colleague, Dr. Susan Shaw, as the Chief Medical Officer of the Saskatchewan Health Authority.
Thank you so much, Preston, and again, my condolences to you, Jody, to Joe, and to your brother Mike and your son Mike. So glad that we're all here today, and I am Susan. I'm the Chief Medical Officer with the Saskatchewan Health Authority, and so I was going to tell the exact same story about Pat, about going for dinner, but I'll build on that a little bit. Pat definitely had vision, but he was also all about action. And that goes back to whether I remember him from being a year behind him. And I was class of 95, Pat was class of 94, and everyone in class of 95 sure knew Pat and knew about Pat. And we were kind of jealous that Pat wasn't in our class. He had a vision and expertise as a clinician, as an educator, and as a researcher. But most of all, I see Pat had power as a builder. Everywhere he went, whether it was in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or through into the United States and back into Saskatchewan again, he was building. And he had a clear vision for not just pediatrics, but for children's health. And I think that's going to be just a part of his legacy here, is that he's shifted our language. I mentioned how I was a year behind Pat, and so I definitely knew about Pat, and I'd been around Pat. And so when he did come back to visit us, and like Pat said, like Preston said, audition, wasn't quite sure if this was the same Pat. He was everything that Preston said. And then the real Pat came out at dinner. Well, they were both real Pats, right? Pat brought his full self into dinner, and I was like, oh man, are we going to be able to land him now? But it was wonderful because he told he was really his full self. You knew who you were getting, and that was the best part of who we had. And while Pat's leadership in the last 6 months was short, it was powerful. He created momentum, and he had, like I said, this legacy. In August this year, I had to chair a short notice, urgent meeting with all the provincial heads of the College of Medicine and the SHA, the physician executives, and the area chiefs of staff. So a pretty professional, usually, group of people. And it was virtual, so we were all in different parts of the province, maybe even the country. Pat was in his backyard, which is a great place to be. The only thing was, he was puffing on a stogie. It was 9:30 in the morning. And he had a lot of good things to say. He said all the right things, but I had to text him, send him a quick message going, could you shut your camera off? No judgment. And we had a good conversation the next day, and I said, just please don't make me have to be the person who tells you, maybe not a cigar on camera as the head of children's health in our province. And he said, you sound just like Jody, which probably means you're right. So I did get quite a few messages from his colleagues going like, wow, that was pretty cool. And I think that's probably Pat. Knew what he needed to do, knew what he needed to say, and he was just going to be himself regardless. And so, again, my condolences to you. And my gratitude, actually, for coming back to Saskatchewan with Dr. Brophy. And like I said, very excited and grateful to have had him back in our province, and the legacy that he started and the momentum that he initiated or recaptured is going to flow, and I'm looking forward to the days ahead. My thanks.
One of the important relationships that Pat rekindled as soon as he got here, I shouldn't say rekindled, built into a strong relationship, was that with the Jim Pattison Children's Hospital Foundation. And I really think that was an important piece of work that he was embarked on. And I'd like to ask Bryn Boback-Lane, CEO of the Jim Pattison Children's Hospital Foundation, to say a few words.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Preston, Jody, Mike, Joe. Our sincere condolences for your loss, our loss. You know, there are times when grief takes away our ability to convey our feelings. However, it is truly apparent that Dr. Brophy's impact has allowed our hearts to share today and to remember. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the board and my colleagues of Jim Pattison Children's Hospital Foundation. Upon meeting Pat, I instinctively knew that he believes strongly in enhancing service to the pediatric population and that he greatly valued people and partnership. With a clear vision, Pat described in detail how he wanted to bring together this province, and that in his own words, he wanted to enable every child to reach their full potential. Pat understood that there would be challenges, and as a Saskatchewan boy, he knew all too well that this province has great diversity and rich culture, vast geography, and many needs, but he also recognized the incredible opportunity that existed amongst us. Through the many meetings and visits that we had together, Pat always spoke with compelling compassion. You're going to hear, I'm sure, a lot of people use the word passion when they speak of your husband and your brother and your father. But his platform for leading provincial pediatric care was quite unique. While he talked about objectives and strategies and spoke of recognition and partnership and bringing together, what he placed the most emphasis on was you, the people. He drew great hope and inspiration from each person he met. He truly believed that we could all find common ground and together we would discover new avenues that intersected and nourished a stronger provincial alliance for children's health in Saskatchewan. And he believed in the power of many. He respected the expertise and the opinions of others, and he embraced inclusive relationship building. In his short time with us, he certainly let me know that he believed in the people. I think coming home for Pat was his next success story in a long list of contributions that he made to children's health care and in serving our most vulnerable population. And he took on his role as head with pride and great responsibility, wanting to unify and inspire the department, our foundation, and this provincial community. He has left an indelible impression, always with the conviction that together we could all reach our greatest potential. But it always came back to the simplicity of how we could best serve the kids, a mantra of which he never wavered. Today, I know he would want us to keep that momentum strong and stay together on this path of hope for us, for the future, and for the children. I know our foundation will carry on his vision as we share in this belief that prioritizing pediatric health will be a deliberate and intentional priority, one we will continue to stand by because everything that Dr. Brophy wanted to achieve here can still be accomplished. Jody, Mike, and Joe, please know that your father's and husband's time here has made an incredible and positive impact on the vision for children's health care in Saskatchewan. We are incredibly grateful for your support of Pat, your willingness to relocate, your steadfast encouragement, and through him, your unwavering commitment and compassion for kids. Thank you for sharing Dr. Brophy with us. We commit to keeping Pat's vision moving forward, extend our deepest condolences, but also our deepest gratitude to you for everything that he has done to better position pediatric health care in this province. While words will not appropriately express our appreciation to you, Jody, please know that both of you attending each foundation event meant the world to us and to those that got to know you both. Even through Pat's most difficult days, he came to every event that he was invited to. I am honored to have had a moment in time to meet Pat and to recognize how special and wonderful he was. And while in the short time, his impact was immense. We really felt that Pat was becoming and was a part of our family in our foundation. We'll miss his regular texts, his calls, his enthusiasm, his incredible wit and humor that has been talked about. But most of all, we're going to miss his love and keenness to bring goodness and light to the pediatric world, a world that still has many challenges, but one he gave great significance and steadfast dedication. We're going to remember Pat's passion because that's what he would have wanted.
After Susan and I were managing to recruit Pat to be provincial head in pediatrics, the second most important thing that I did was sponsor him to become a member at Riverside Country Club and join our infamous Friday afternoon gang. And I think Steve Goybov is here. There we are. Steve, do you want to say a few words?
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to say a few words. What was nice to have Pat join us with, finally we had someone younger to join our Friday afternoon group. My first introduction to Pat was when Preston called me one day and he said, Pat wants to join the Friday afternoon group. And we're a fairly significant group of golfers, none of us very good, but all well placed. And I said, Preston, absolutely, but of course he's going to have to go through the same interview process and have him vetted by the 25 Friday afternoon golfers. And we did that, and I have to say he passed with flying colors. My involvement with Pat was sadly short, and I'm honored to have been his friend, his colleague, briefly his family doctor, and his fellow golfer. Both of us were searching for the holy grail of golf like most of us who golf. None of us have probably reached it. Him and I were kindred spirits. As many of you may know, my father, Nate Goluboff, was one of the iconic pediatricians in Saskatoon for 50 years, and he graduated from Manitoba, and I know that Pat was connected to Manitoba very closely. I realized very early on that Pat's dedication to children and his vision for the future was absolutely profound, and I had the fortune of visiting with Jody and him in the hospital one day, and he grabbed his computer and he went through his PowerPoint presentation, sharing with me that vision, and it was moving and impressive, and of course will continue to be manifested by those left behind. I know how impressed everyone was with what he's intended to do and what will continue to be a legacy. We had a wonderful time in the golf course. I loved cigars, but not to the extent that he loved them. And you know, we played for large amounts of money in the golf course. At the most, we could lose $6. And even when Pat became more unwell, he didn't even insist, as most of us would, to get more strokes because I'm not feeling well. He said, no, I'll play it as it is. He had a great sense of humor. He was a lot of fun, made good friends of those of us at Riverside, and you know, we'll be deeply missed. As I said, I was honored to be, for that brief period of time, a colleague, a family doctor, a golfer, a friend. And in Jewish tradition, as many of you will know, there's a word mensch. A mensch is a good person, honorable, thoughtful, kind to others. And if I've never known anyone, I've known many people, he was the iconic mensch, and I'm going to value his memory and his kindness and his friendship. And of course, to Judy and Mike and Joel, my deepest condolences. I will not forget your dad, and I'm sure no one else will here as well. Thank you.
So the class of '94 actually is a pretty illustrious group. There's a lot of leaders in this medical school and in this city and province that came from that class, and obviously they were thrilled to see Pat and Jody come to town, and certainly were a key part in welcoming them back to Saskatoon. And I'd like Mark Sanders to speak on behalf of the class.
Okay, thank you. I've got my Kleenex. So, yeah, I'd really like to thank my classmates for the opportunity to give this address. It really is a privilege and an honor. Foremost, on behalf of myself, I want to wish my deepest sympathies, Jody, and Mike and Joe. Today I'd like to tell you a story. This story is my version of how Pat Brophy intersected and impacted the lives of some of us in the class as I know it. Pat Brophy, Johnny Brophy. There was Johnny Morehart, there was Johnny Houle, there was Johnny Colo, there was all the men in our class were called Johnny, and Pat started that. It was like a brotherhood. And recently, when I was asked to do this, it was nice to take real time this past week to just really sit and contemplate and think about the time we had together, that chapter. And I thought back to the start of medical school, that first week in September. Everybody's kind of nervous and on edge, and some of us had been trying to get into medical school for many years, so it was a kind of a dream come true, but a lot of nerves. And in those early days, when it comes to Pat, I remember distinctly being at a volleyball, sand volleyball or somewhere out tournament, and I thought, who is this crazy guy in our class? He really stood out. And he seemed like, to me, to be pretty rough around the edges. I don't know if anybody else noticed that. There was nobody in our class that was like him, like at all. He was unique. He was a storyteller, a joker, a drinker, a smoker, it's been mentioned, and a button pusher at that time. But he was relaxed, often when I wasn't. There was always a bit of shock value just around the corner. You had to kind of get ready for it, and I think we kind of eased into learning how to be with Pat, and that was nice. He lived hard at that time. Sounds like he continued. Played hard and worked hard. But for the people he loved with all his heart. He was one of a kind. There's no denying that. Here's what, when I, in the last week when I was kind of asking classmates, can you, tell me, what can I say from your standpoint? And here's what a few classmates had to say. For Brophy, filters were useless, but he always had a heart of gold. I remember Christmas caroling in Lumsden. That man could carry a tune. He was a great guy with a warm heart. I remember one of his favorite sayings, pitter patter, let's get at her. And he loved his cigar and Irish whiskey. One classmate remembered how amazed they were at how Pat was able to cope with his dad's death during medical school. It was a big stressor. Another says, I remember being in a bar in Regina with a number of classmates and watching Joe Carter hit the World Series. It was such a celebration. So personally, I really got to know Pat in our third year of medicine when my wife and I rented the house across the street. That was like an eye-opener. I thought I knew the Pat, but I really got to know him then and got to know Jody. We were introduced to numerous interesting and eclectic friends that Pat would bring around. Some of them seemed to be almost from a parallel universe. There were lots of parties, and Pat was involved in every single one. There's no doubt. I remember one particular party when, I'm going to say, it's really quite fuzzy in my memory for some reason, but there was 6 or 7 or 8 of our male med school classmates, no names. We were successfully dared very late into the night, not sure if that makes it any better, but by the women who were present to run around the block wearing very little, I'll say. And this was right in front of City Hospital. And we were in medical school. There was a lot on the line. A lot. But we did it. Or somebody did it. Somebody, not saying any names. And the run started out with everybody kind of running with confidence, chatting, laughing. But then it soon became evident who in the group was actually in good shape. and could run around the block. And soon the group kind of spread out, and the fit runners became these like small little specks in front, and there was kind of some back runners, and I think I was in that pack, that were coughing and sputtering and just really hoping to get back to where we started. Anyway, it all ended up okay, and we moved on in our lives from that. I remember Pat's study habits as I knew them. He often seemed to kind of leave things to the last minute and then cram all night before an exam, drinking coffee and chain smoking. He would go down the rabbit hole. I'd walk across the street, taking a study break, and where are you at? And he would have gone down the rabbit hole in research on something that was definitely not going to be on the exam. And I would have been preparing for days just with study cards and trying to get the big picture to just pass. And, in hindsight, kind of looking back on his curiosity, his desire for true knowledge, I'm not surprised about what everybody else is saying here. How he excelled in kind of a specialty that I feel is sometimes reserved for the biggest brains in medicine. That's been my perspective. But also how he managed to really, really excel in his career on multiple levels. There was a time in Las Vegas, kind of for a 4-day golf holiday a few years after graduation. And this was supposed to be a group of 4 of us, 2 people at the last minute couldn't be, so it was just me and Pat. We were together in a hotel room or in a place in Vegas for 4 days. And it was a golf holiday, but we golfed 9 holes. So, it's kind of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And it sounds like he may have had actually similar trips with other classmates subsequent. As I said, I really feel a sense of admiration hearing about how accomplished Pat was in his professional life. And it puts a real smile on my face to think of all the people that he's connected with over the years. All the people who had the opportunity to experience that essence. My last contact with Pat was via a text exchange in August. I was on holiday, and I had been to my wife's 30th med school reunion in June, but I didn't know Pat was here that time. But he texted me, and he said, "You came to town and didn't say hi?" ? And I said, "Brophy, how the heck are you? I heard Saskatchewan landed a big fish. Next time I'm in Saskatoon, I'll definitely find you." And he said he was glad to be home, absolutely. Having fun in my new role. Talk to you soon. So it wasn't supposed to end this way. This wasn't. So in conclusion, I'd like to read a passage from a Richard Wagamese book, Embers, that kind of embodies, I think, how we all connect to each other and can connect to each other if we look for that. And we approach our lives on different trajectories, each of us spinning in our own separate shining orbits. What gives this life its resonance is when those trajectories cross and we become engaged with each other for as long or as fleetingly as we do. There's a shared energy then, and it can feel as though the whole universe is in the process of coming together. I live for those times. No one is truly ever just passing through. Every encounter has within it the power of enchantment if we're willing to look for it. Pat's energy is in all of us. I haven't known many people to have such a wild and crazy spinning orbit, and I salute that. Before I step down, I'd like to just announce the class of 1994 Dr. Pat Brophy Memorial Scholarship. Pat shared his vision for child health, for Saskatchewan with some of his reunited Saskatchewan classmates this past summer. He believed that promoting child health is not the job of a single discipline, but that improved health requires committed work among different medical disciplines, health professions, and sectors in order to address the determinants of child health to make a lasting change. This memorial scholarship is intended to support a resident who is working to advance the health of children through community work, advocacy, research, or clinical service. And if people are interested in learning more about how they can contribute to this, you can speak to Dr. Meredith McCaig or Dr. Sachin Takaya, and I think there's some brochures on the side table here. Thank you.
So before I turn things over to Jody, I just would like everybody to hang around afterwards. Pat would want us to socialize, share stories, and there's refreshments and lots of time to just gather and be with each other. And I now happy to turn things over to you, Jody.
I just want to thank everybody for coming today. We will have a little brief goodbye at the end with Joseph, but for now I'd like Pat's brother Desmond to come up and just say a few words. He has a unique relationship with Pat that none of us had. He knew him when he was very young, and he has a few interesting stories to tell. It's Desmond.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Desmond Brophy, Pat's brother. I'm going to be brief today. I suspect and I hope that most of you folks here have seen the recording from the memorial that we had in Rochester. So a lot of what needed to be said was said there, but there was a few things I did want to mention today. My brother Pat, he had really social and emotional quotients that were off the chart. I don't think I've ever seen anybody that was able to look at somebody and in a brief instant understand what they needed to feel like they could fit in, what they needed someone else to say, and Pat always knew what to say. So it's hard to put those up on a PowerPoint slide to say what they are, but you always knew it when Pat was there. He had those emotional and social quotients that made everybody feel like they were very special to him. Because of where we are, I'm pretty sure that everyone gathered here today has already knew that, what I just described. His uncanny ability to connect with people and to make them feel as though they were the most special people in his life. Most people here knew Pat in his younger years, either growing up in Regina or later in the university days at U of R, U of S. When I spoke at Pat's memorial in Rochester a few weeks ago, when I was reflecting on what I should say there, I realized that almost everyone there knew Pat in his adult, grown-up life, and they had the opposite perspective that most folks here do. They knew Pat already as an accomplished researcher, a talented pediatrician, and a leader. Very few of them knew of the experiences that had shaped Pat to help him, during his upbringing, help him become the man that he was. And so today I wanted to briefly share with you a little bit the opposite perspective and share with you a few of the impacts the other way that Pat had on those people that none of you would have met and known in Rochester. The first that stood out was a young man who was there. He didn't speak, and I barely would have even known, he wouldn't have even known really that he was there, except for the fact that I went over and spoke to him. He was probably in his mid-20s. Pat had literally saved this young man's life. And I mean that in a truly literal sense. He had saved this young man's life some 10 years earlier. And as I spoke to him, I realized that, not only had Pat technically intervened with his talent and expertise, he treated that young man's family with such profound respect and empathy that this young fellow's life had been moved. Not just saving his life, his whole life had been moved. And because of that, he wanted to, when he heard of Pat's passing, he traveled halfway across the country to make sure that he could be there to pay his respects. There was another gentleman who spoke. His wife was a world-renowned doctor, a very talented doctor, talented researcher, very, very highly established. And of course, Pat being Pat, he knew that he wanted to have this talented person join his team. So Pat hired this talented doctor in Iowa. But it was interesting because this newly hired doctor and her husband, they were surprised on the first day of work when she was to start work at the University Hospital in Iowa. Pat made a very conscious decision to not join her. He was not there on her first day of work. Pat knew, of course, that she was an amazing doctor. She had lots of connections already very well established in Iowa, and that she knew most of her colleagues already. But what Pat also knew was that the move had been extremely difficult for the husband. He had left a job as an aerospace engineer, and he'd moved to Iowa, supporting his wife on this new wonderful opportunity that she had, but he didn't know anybody. He had no job, he had no friends, he had no colleagues. And on that very first day of work, knowing that the husband was an avid golfer, Pat arranged for a round of golf with this fellow. And sure enough, the other two that made up the foursome happened to also be very well established aerospace engineers in a local aerospace engineering firm. Pat's empathy and understanding of other people's emotions and needs shone through in that example to me. In that way, he made sure that their whole family was looked after. In addition to simply building that team that he was so good at in his professional work, he wanted to make sure that that whole family felt welcome and had opportunities. And that's exactly how Pat was wired. I won't go into too much detail, but this is also the other gentleman who told a lovely story about he was growing up in the 1970s, and it was typical 1970s growing up where mom and dad would say, if you don't eat your vegetables, young man, we're going to treat you like Ralph. And Ralph was this theoretical, unknown brother who would never be allowed to go on Christmas vacation and never get Christmas presents and never go on vacations because he was such a badly behaved person. And Pat, of course, went on to inhibit this persona and became this lesser-known Ralph Jeton who would always going to be the child who was never allowed to go on vacations. And in Pat's own way, he, of course, ended up becoming very fast friends with all of this family's extended relations as the poor fellow who was never allowed to have any Christmas presents or go on Christmas vacation. As you'd expect, every single person that I ran into during that time in Rochester, from the manager of the golf course to the bartenders to the lady cleaning the tables, knew Pat. He made everyone feel like they were his best friend. He valued each of them and their personal stories, and it was genuine. This was not someone who was looking to network. He loved everybody he met. He wanted to see them at their best. More than anyone in Rochester, many of you would ever know, you people here in this room know that 2826 Lakeview Avenue in Regina was a very chaotic place. Pat and I always knew that Mom and Dad loved us, both. But I was always a little bit at dis-ease. I always felt a bit uneasy. I was never really sure who was going to be in the house when I came home from school. There was people coming and going. It was a bit unnerving for a 10-year-old. But amid all that, I couldn't think of a better phrase, benevolent chaos, I came to realize in the fullness of time that Pat was my protector through that entire period. He protected and looked after me, and I'll always love him for that. He was wired to be a protector and a supporter of everyone that he met, that he felt were underdogs or that needed support. It's just how he was. Several people shared with me that in his very final hours, in his hospital bed in the ICU in Rochester, a place that you can always imagine as being very somber and very controlled access, not very many people are allowed. I don't know how many, 30, 40, 50 people were in that ICU room there with Pat. And there was a lineup down the hallway. And no ICU ever, it's unimaginable that that amount of crowding and people would ever be allowed in an ICU. But they were all there to see Pat. And everybody in that hospital knew that the most important thing was to let people have their final time with Pat. I wanted to paraphrase one of the words of the speakers in Rochester. There was a speaker who spoke, and it really moved me. And I'm paraphrasing somewhat what she said, so forgive me if I don't get the words quite right. She told us that we must not mourn Pat and his loss. It's not what he'd want. We need to think of Pat as being out on a pub crawl somewhere. But he's at one pub ahead of us, and he didn't leave us the itinerary of the pubs he was going to. And so with each pub that I go into, I'm going to spend a little moment looking around to see if he's there. If I don't find him, I'm going to make sure that I'm ready to buy him a glass of whiskey when he walks in, because I know he'll have his cigars with him. And I take comfort in knowing that he'll certainly be waiting for me in Heaven's Pub when I arrive. You folks may not know, over the years, you may have got the idea looking at some of the pictures, Pat and Jody opened their home many times over the years to bring in very, very sick children from some pretty nasty parts of the world, in the third world. Not just to help give them the life-saving care that they would certainly never get at home, but to give them the love and warmth of a place where they could convalesce and just be kids again. Of course, it was Pat's technical acumen and his technical connections that allowed that to happen. But it was the love and strength of Pat and Jody that allowed that environment to foster. Jody, you are now, and you always have been, a hero to me and to Janice. Janice, Kathleen, and I love you, and we love Mike and we love Joe very much. And Pat, I love you, and I'll miss you. Thank you very much.
We have one final speaker for this afternoon. Patrick's cousin, Sam, couldn't be here today. He's working very hard, but he sent in a video to share his thoughts and remembrances of Pat.
Hi there, Dr. Brophy here, Dr. Sam Brophy, the far less accomplished, less intelligent, and less well-known Dr. Brophy. I really wish I could be there in person to celebrate Pat's life, but I have to stay here for work, and I thought Pat would understand that, and so this video will have to do. But I really wanted to share a story about Pat, which was when I first got into medical school, he wanted to give me a gift. So he sent the gift to me, and before opening it, we got onto a video call like this. And when I opened it up, it was this beautiful black leather doctor's bag with my initials embroidered into it. And that was the kind of bag that doctors used to take to their patients' homes when they did home visits. And I remember opening it up and with him on the video call, and my first thought and the first thing I said was like, man, you're a bit out of practice. No one does home calls anymore. And of course he knew that. And of course he just started laughing and told me that it wasn't a tool for me to do home visits, but it was a symbol for what he thought medicine was supposed to be and used to be and still should be, and how doctors should be. And that was going that extra mile for your patient and remembering to treat our patients like human beings rather than numbers on a lab test or findings on an x-ray. That was just the kind of doctor he was, and the kind of doctor I think everyone should be. And that small symbol has just it had this lasting effect on me throughout my medical career. That was over 10 years now that he sent me this. And I remember throughout medical school too, I would text him all these silly questions that, looking back on them, they were really silly questions that I'm almost embarrassed to have asked him. But without any delay or hesitation, he would just explain everything to me with pure positivity and no judgment. And he did so without any expectation of anything in return. And it just further speaks to the kind of person Pat was. And Pat, wherever you are now, like, I hope you know how much you'll be missed. But more so, I really hope you know the profound impact that you have had on my life and the lives of so many others. I am in so many ways the doctor I am today because of your words of guidance and your compassion. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you for that. And while I may never have the kind of legacy as Dr. Brophy that you have left, I just want you to know that I will be doing my part to continue with your legacy and push those values that you taught me forward. And I have the bag you gave me sitting in my office at work, and whenever anyone asks what it is, I tell them this story. So what was just a 20-minute lesson for me on the day I got into medical school about 10 years ago has already been propagated to so many other people. So I just wanted to tell that story because I think it speaks to the kind of person and doctor that Pat was, and a very small example of the incredible impact he's had on so many. So in true Brophy fashion, I will end this by cheersing you with some Irish whiskey. Here's to you, Dr. Pat. Thank you for everything you have done for me and everyone else in your life. You will be missed, and it was an honor to have known you.
I just want to say thank you all for the love and support and everything everyone has done for our family personally and extended family, and everything for this amazing woman up here. She's done a lot, been through a lot, so it means a lot to all of us. Thank you so much.
And I also want to thank everyone for coming. It's wonderful to see how many people that love Pat and will carry on his memory. It warms my heart to know that there is so much love in the room right now. And at your next opportunity, I just want you to raise a glass, whatever's in it, and just toast Pat. We love him and we'll miss him. Thank you.
So I really just want to reiterate my thanks for everyone attending here today, and those in the room and those virtually, or we'll see this subsequently, and really invite you to stay around, share stories, and I think we've heard what an amazing Pat was here today. As I said at the start, terribly, terribly sad, but at the same, from what you've heard, incredibly inspiring man, and I know he will have an amazing impact on child health, on this college, on this health authority, and all the people here in Saskatchewan. Thanks, everybody.